Most mornings in our house started the same way. I was usually up first. I'd grind coffee in the kitchen while the dishwasher finished its low, steady hum. And by the time the sun came through the back windows, my son would already be at the table building something out of blocks or folded paper. My wife liked quiet mornings. So did I. After years of work that had trained me to notice too much, I had built a life that felt deliberate and ordinary. At the time, I was 37 and working as an architect outside Washington, in Northern Virginia. My firm handled renovations more than new construction. Old banks, old schools, office buildings that needed a second life. I liked that kind of work. It was precise, practical. You looked at what had been damaged, what had been hidden, what could still carry weight, and then you decided what could stay. That morning, my son Owen was trying to balance wooden blocks into a tower that leaned a little more each time he touched it. "Do buildings remember things?" he asked me. I looked up from my mug. "What do you mean?" He shrugged without looking at me. "You always say you can tell what happened in them." I smiled at that. "Sometimes you can. A crack in a wall, a worn stair tread, repairs that don't match. Places keep records in their own way." My wife, Claire, set a plate beside me and brushed my shoulder as she passed. "You two start early with this stuff," she said. Her voice was light, calm, the kind of tone that made a room feel settled. I remember the smell of toast. I remember the kitchen tile feeling cool under my feet. I remember the soft scrape of Owen's blocks against the tabletop and the way Claire stood at the counter with one hand around her coffee cup, looking out the back window for a second longer than usual. At the time, none of it seemed important. A few hours later, I would be in a locked guest room with my son asleep against my chest, staring through a narrow gap in the curtains while my phone lit up with a message from my father. "Don't let your wife see you." But that came later. That morning still looked normal. Claire had been in my life for 11 years. We'd met at a fundraising event in Georgetown when I was still trying to become a civilian again after military intelligence work I rarely discussed. She had been sharp, organized, easy to talk to. The kind of person who remembered names, noticed details, and made other people feel as if they were being fully listened to. We built a life that fit together cleanly. A house in Alexandria, a son, a routine, enough peace that I had started to believe peace could be permanent. My father never believed that. He had spent most of his adult life in government work that came with careful language and long silences. He did not call for small talk. He did not ask casual questions. And he never called me during the workday unless something had already gone wrong. So when my phone rang on the drive into the city and I saw his name, I picked up right away. "Dad." His voice came through low and flat. "You with Owen?" "I just dropped him off. I'm on my way to the office." A short pause. Then he asked, "How's everything at home?" I slowed a little at a red light. "Fine." "What?" Another pause. "Not long. Long enough. Keep your phone on you," he said. "That's not an answer." "No," he said. "It isn't." Then the line went dead. I sat there for a second after the light changed, one hand on the wheel, listening to the turn signal clicking in the empty car. My father was not dramatic. If he said less than necessary, it was because he had already decided that was the safest amount to say. I put the phone face down on the console and drove the rest of the way in. My office was in a converted brick building with tall industrial windows and old pine floors that creaked in the hallway outside the conference room. We were in the middle of redesigning a former bank into a shared technology workspace, and most of my day should have been spent reviewing structural options for the main floor. Instead, I noticed things I would normally have ignored. One of my junior associates asked twice where I'd be that evening. A woman I recognized from Claire's social circle was across the street when I stepped out for coffee. She wasn't doing anything unusual, just standing there with sunglasses on, looking into a storefront window. Still, I noticed her. By late afternoon, I had that old feeling again, the one I used to get before a briefing went bad. Nothing visible had changed. That was usually the first sign. When I picked Owen up after practice, I checked the lot before I got out of the car. 2 extra vehicles near the fence. A man on his phone who never looked up. A black SUV idling farther down the street. None of it was enough on its own. Together, it sat wrong with me. At home, Claire had made pasta. Owen talked through dinner about school and a loose tooth and a bike trick he was almost certain he could land by the weekend. Claire laughed in the right places. I asked the usual questions. The house smelled like garlic and warm bread, and if someone had walked past our dining room window, They would have seen a family having a quiet Tuesday night. I watched my wife reach for her water glass and noticed a pale mark near her wrist, like something had rubbed there repeatedly. A watch strap, maybe, or something else. "You're quiet," she said. "Long day." She gave a small nod. "You need sleep." Maybe I did. Owen was asleep by 9. Claire took a call a little after 10 and stepped out onto the patio, saying she didn't want to wake him. I sat in my study with a set of floor plans open on my desk and pretended to work. Outside, the neighborhood had gone still. The faint buzz of insects. A distant siren somewhere closer to the highway. The house settling into itself. At 2:47 in the morning, my phone started vibrating across the wood desktop. My father. I answered on the first ring. "Dad, are you home?" "Yes." "Listen carefully," he said. "Lock every door. Turn off every light. Pick up Owen and take him to the guest room at the back of the house. Now." I stood up so fast the chair rolled into the wall behind me. "What happened?" "Do exactly what I said." Something in his voice took the question away. I went straight to Owen's room, lifted him carefully from the bed, and carried him against my shoulder. He stirred once and made a tired sound, but didn't wake fully. I moved through the dark house without switching on a light. In the hallway, I could hear Claire moving in our bedroom. My father was still on the line. Then he said, very clearly, "Do not tell your wife where you are." I stopped in the dark. For a second, I thought I had heard him wrong. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I took Owen into the guest room, locked the door behind us, and crossed to the window. Then I pulled the curtain back just enough to see the driveway. Then I waited. From that room, I had a narrow view of the side yard, the back gate, and part of the driveway through the reflection off a neighbor's security light. At first, I didn't see anything, just the pale wash of light on the fence, the outline of our patio chairs, the maple tree shifting slightly in the dark. Owen stirred against me and whispered, "Dad." I put my hand lightly on his back. "It's okay. Stay quiet." His breathing slowed again, but he was awake now. I could feel that much. Children know when an adult's silence means something. My father was still on the line, though he wasn't speaking. I could hear keys tapping in the background. A voice farther away. Papers moving. Then his breathing again, controlled and even. "Talk to me," I said quietly. "Not yet." Those 2 words told me more than a long explanation would have. I kept the curtain open by less than an inch. A moment later, movement crossed the yard. Not outside. Inside the house. From the angle of the guest room, I could see a slice of the second floor through the rear windows. The light was off in the hall, but the room behind it caught enough spill from the neighbor's floodlight to show motion. A figure moved past the opening with slow, deliberate control. Not someone half asleep. Not someone startled awake. I knew the shape of my wife's walk. After 11 years, of course I did. What I saw didn't fit it. She moved like someone checking corners. One hand lifted briefly to the side of her head, as if adjusting an earpiece or brushing hair away, except there was no hesitation in it. No uncertainty. Then she disappeared from view. I felt something cold settle through me. Not fear exactly. Fear comes with confusion. This was narrower than that. Recognition without understanding. "Dad," I said. He answered immediately. "I know." That told me he was seeing some version of the same thing. I looked down at Owen. His eyes were open now, reflecting what little light came through the curtain gap. "Are we hiding?" he whispered. I leaned close so he didn't need to strain to hear me. "We're being very quiet for a few minutes. That's all." He studied my face for a second, then nodded once. It was such a small act of trust that it nearly broke something in me. I kept my voice level. "Can you do that for me?" Another nod. Then he tucked his chin against my shoulder and stayed still. A phone on the other end of the line beeped. My father said, "I'm sending a message. Read it. Don't answer out loud." A second later, my screen lit up. "Free vehicles in the area. 2 confirmed outside your block. Your wife is not alone. Stay hidden." I read it twice. There are moments when your mind tries to reject a fact simply because it arrived too quickly. Mine tried for maybe half a second, long enough to think, "No, that can't be what he means." Then training took over where emotion would have slowed me down. I set the phone brightness lower and typed with one thumb. "Who is outside?" The response came almost immediately. Still confirming. "Do not move unless I tell you." I looked back through the curtain. This time I saw Claire step out onto the patio. She was wearing dark clothes I had never seen before. Not pajamas. Not anything from her closet that belonged to the life I knew. She moved across the stone without a sound I could hear from the window. Her posture was different too, more compact, focused, and in her right hand was something small and black that caught the edge of the light for just a second. A handgun. Silenced, I thought. From the shape. I didn't react outwardly. I couldn't. Owen was still pressed against me, and whatever happened next would depend on whether I stayed useful. I lowered the curtain and stepped back from the window. That was the first moment the world I had been living in separated cleanly into before and after. Before that second, Claire was my wife. After it, she was a person standing in my yard with a weapon, moving through darkness like she had done it many times before. My father called again as soon as I cut the first line. I answered in a whisper. "How long have you known?" "Not long enough." His voice had changed. It was still controlled, but there was strain under it now. "Explain." "Later." "No," I said. "Not later." Silence. Then, a communication was intercepted tonight. A location was mentioned. "Your address." Her name wasn't used, but the timing, the pattern, the context. Once we looked deeper, it came together fast. "Who is she?" There was a pause that seemed to last longer than it probably did. "A deep cover foreign asset," he said. "Placed years ago. We're still sorting the details." I looked toward the door. It was a simple guest room lock. Good enough for delay. Not protection. "You're telling me my wife was planted in my life?" "I'm telling you the woman you married is not who she claimed to be." It is hard to describe what that does to the mind in real time. People imagine shouting, denial, questions that spill over each other. For me, it was quieter than that. I thought of our wedding album, her handwriting on school forms, her coat on the chair by the front door, grocery lists, the way she used to leave a lamp on for me if I worked late. 11 years of ordinary things. A whole structure built out of daily habits and small trust. And all I said was, "Why now?" "Because something changed tonight," he said. Whatever her assignment was, it moved to clean up. I understood that word immediately. No explanation needed. I looked at Owen again. He was pretending not to listen, which meant he was hearing every word. I turned away from him slightly and asked, "What are my options?" "That's better," my father said, and I recognized the shift in him too. This was not a father speaking anymore. This was a man who had gone to process because process was the only thing left. "Listen carefully. Step 1, stay dark. Step 2, keep Owen quiet and close. Step 3, if I text move, you go out the back window, over the fence, and head northeast. A vehicle will meet you." I repeated it once under my breath. He continued, "Do not go toward the street in front of the house. Do not go through the kitchen. Do not assume anyone outside is law enforcement unless I confirm it." "Who's driving the vehicle?" A small pause. "Evan Mercer." I closed my eyes for a second at that name. Evan and I had served together years earlier. We had done work that required patience, discretion, and the ability to read a room faster than it changed. If my father had called him, then this was already larger than one house on one street. "When did you call him?" "About 40 minutes ago," which meant my father had begun moving pieces before he contacted me. That was exactly what he would do if the situation was serious enough that delay could get someone killed. Outside, a car door closed somewhere nearby. Then another. I went back to the curtain. 2 men were moving along the far side of the property line. They weren't in any uniform I recognized. Dark jackets, gloves. One of them spoke into his sleeve or collar. Neither looked in my direction. Claire crossed the yard toward the detached guest space near the rear fence, then stopped midway as if listening for something. The confidence in her movement was what stayed with me most. No panic, no improvisation. She wasn't reacting to events. She was following a procedure. That detail mattered. It meant she had expected some version of this night. Maybe not the exact shape of it, but enough. My phone lit again. Vehicle in 90 seconds. Be ready. I slid the window latch up without sound and raised the frame just enough to test it. Cool air moved into the room. Damp grass, mulch from the flower bed below. The faint metallic smell that comes before rain, though the sky had been clear earlier. Owen looked at the window, then at me. "We're leaving," he whispered. "Yes." "Is Mom coming?" That question had to wait inside me because there was nowhere to put it. "Not with us," I said. He didn't cry. He just nodded in a way no child should ever have to. Headlights flashed once through the gap beyond the fence and then disappeared. A moment later, tires hissed softly on the road behind the properties. My father spoke into my ear. "Move now." Everything after that became simple because it had to. I lifted Owen onto the windowsill first and climbed out after him. The grass was cold through my socks. Somewhere behind us, a voice called out from the patio. I didn't turn to look. I put Owen over the fence, climbed after him, and landed hard enough to jar my knee. He caught my hand immediately. We ran bent low across the neighbor's yard. When we reached the back lane, a dark van rolled to a stop with the side door already opening. Evan was in the driver's seat. He looked older than when I'd last seen him, but not softer. "Get in," he said. I helped Owen inside and climbed in after him. The door shut. The van moved before I had fully turned around. Then, from somewhere behind us, sharp cracks split the quiet. Not many. 2 or 3. Suppressed fire, I thought first. Then something heavier. Owen flinched and grabbed my arm. I put my hand over his and kept my voice even. "You're okay." Evan drove without lights for half a block, then turned hard and accelerated through residential streets I knew well enough to realize he was avoiding anything obvious. No direct routes. No major intersections. No patterns someone else could predict in one glance. In the front seat, he said, "Your father told me enough." "Then tell me the part he didn't." He checked the mirror. "He's still building the picture." "That isn't an answer either." "No," he said. "It isn't." For a minute, the only sound was the engine and Owen's breathing beside me. Then my phone buzzed again. A text from my father. "You are out." "Good. Do not contact anyone. Do not go to your office. Do not use your home accounts. We'll speak when you're secure." I stared at the message while streetlights moved in stripes across the van's interior. 11 years. That was the number that kept returning. Not because it meant more than anything else, but because it made the deception measurable. 11 birthdays. 11 winters. Thousands of meals. Normal arguments. Ordinary errands. A child raised in the middle of it. I put the phone face down in my lap. Then I waited. Evan took us to a townhouse in Arlington I had never seen before, though I understood right away what it was. Nothing about it stood out. That was the point. A narrow brick place in a row of nearly identical homes. Small porch light. Trim hedges. One car parked out front that looked like it hadn't moved in days. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust, fresh paint, and coffee that had been sitting on a warmer too long. Functional furniture. Blank walls. No family photos. No clutter that would tell you who had stayed there before. A temporary place built to look permanent. Owen had gone very quiet by then. Not frightened in a loud way. Just withdrawn. He carried his backpack with both hands and stayed close enough that I could feel him at my side, even when I wasn't looking at him. Evan crouched to his level and said, "There's a room upstairs with clean blankets and a TV. You can pick whichever bed you want." Owen nodded once. "Want me to show you?" Evan asked. He looked at me first. I said, "Go ahead." After they went upstairs, I stayed in the kitchen and stood with both hands on the counter for maybe 10 seconds. The house was still, pipes clicking lightly in the walls. The low hum of the refrigerator, a siren far off, then gone. I remember staring at a bowl of unopened sugar packets on the table as if it were something I needed to solve. Then my father arrived. He came in through the back entrance with another man I didn't know. He looked exactly like what he was, tired, careful, and already 3 conversations ahead. Gray at the temples, tie loosened, rain on the shoulders of his coat, though it had not started where we were. My father took one look at me and stopped. He did not say he was sorry. That told me more than an apology would have. He set a manila folder on the table between us and said, "Owen, upstairs. He's safe. For now." He nodded once. "Good." Then he pulled out a chair, sat down, and finally gave me the version of the truth he was willing to say aloud. The woman I knew as Claire was not Claire. The identity was real in pieces. A birth record, a school history, a past that had been built carefully over time and reinforced through documents, references, and routine contact points strong enough to survive background review. The real person, if she had ever existed in a normal sense, had been folded into something else years earlier. My father's people believed the woman in my house had been inserted with a long-range purpose tied to people around me, not just me. At some point, that purpose had narrowed toward access, toward my father, and through him, toward systems and people his work touched. He spoke in clipped, clean sentences. No embellishment. No speculation unless he marked it as speculation. I appreciated that. I needed facts that could hold weight. "When did you first suspect her?" I asked. "Tonight." "That's not true." His eyes shifted to mine and held there. We had fragments before tonight. Not her. Not your family. Fragments around communications patterns, support contacts, and one or two unexplained alignments. Tonight gave us the address. That changed everything. I believed that part mostly. What I did not believe was that tonight was the first moment he had felt real concern. Men like my father did not live to his age in that line of work by waiting for certainty. I opened the folder. Inside were printed photographs, a short timeline, and copies of records with sections blacked out. One image stopped me immediately. It showed Claire, my wife, as my mind still insisted on calling her, walking out of a parking garage in Georgetown 2 weeks earlier. She was beside a man in a charcoal coat carrying a leather portfolio. There was nothing intimate or dramatic in the image. Just two people walking with the kind of quiet proximity that suggests familiarity. Another photo showed the same man entering a diplomatic vehicle. A third showed a woman I recognized from one of Claire's lunches with friends. Her name, according to the typed label beneath the image, was not the name I knew. I turned the page. Phone logs, car registrations, a timeline of meetings that looked accidental until you saw them in order. I felt my breathing slow instead of speed up. That used to happen to me in the field too. The moment emotion stops being useful, the mind starts arranging things by category. Who met whom? When? How often? Under what cover? My father noticed the shift and said nothing, which was one of the more respectful things he had ever done for me. Who else knows? I asked. A very small number of people. Is law enforcement moving? Yes. Fast enough. He didn't answer. That was answer enough. I turned another page and saw an address connected to a consulting office I knew well. My own firm had done contract work with them the previous year. There were notes beside it indicating access windows, keycard anomalies, and after-hours entries that didn't match the official logs. I sat back slightly. My office. My father nodded. We believe information moved through multiple channels. Not always directly. Sometimes through schedules. Sometimes through design materials. Routine things that don't look sensitive until someone aggregates them. I thought of project plans, government renovations, security layouts hidden inside ordinary building packets, access routes, mechanical maps, service corridors, old vault conversions, utility shutoffs, things an architect handles as logistics, things someone else could use as leverage. Not because I had betrayed anything knowingly, because I had been near useful things for years. I kept reading. There were bank records too, not mine, but connected to one of our consultants and then outward through shell entities. Not enough for a courtroom yet. Enough for pattern recognition. That was the first moment the shock started giving way to structure. Not relief. Not calm exactly. Order. I pulled a legal pad toward me from the counter and drew a line down the center. On the left, I wrote confirmed. On the right, assumed. My father watched but didn't interrupt. Under confirmed, I wrote, my wife had a false identity. She was armed tonight. She was coordinating with others. The house was under observation. My work may have been used as a collection route. Then under assumed, primary target may have been my father. My marriage was operational from the start. My son and I became liabilities tonight. I put the pen down. Good, my father said quietly. I looked up. Don't. He gave a slight nod. Fair enough. I asked for a secure phone and a current list of every person who had intersected with Claire in the last 6 months through social events, school events, my office, or neighborhood routines. I asked which of those names were already being checked and which were still sitting in a stack waiting for someone to get to them. I asked what was being done with the house, the cars, the visible accounts, the school records, the neighbors' cameras, and the devices still sitting in my kitchen and study. That was when the other man in the room finally spoke. He introduced himself as Special Agent Daniel Reese, assigned temporarily as liaison until a larger team could formalize control. He said, "We need you to stay out of this." I looked at him and said, "Then you need to move faster." He didn't seem offended, just tired. This isn't a movie. There are procedures. I'm aware. Then let us work. I glanced down at the folder. A woman lived in my house for over a decade under a constructed identity, accessed my routines, leveraged my work environment, and moved toward my son's room tonight with a suppressed weapon. If this is your version of working fast, I'm adjusting my expectations. The room stayed quiet after that. My father took off his glasses, cleaned them once with a folded handkerchief, and put them back on. It was a small gesture, but I had seen it before. It meant he was making a decision. He said, "Daniel, give us a minute." The agent stepped into the hall. My father waited until the door swung nearly shut. Then he slid the rest of the folder across the table. "I'm not authorizing anything," he said. "Of course not. But if you're going to start thinking, think usefully." I opened the second section. This was less polished. Rawer. A printout of messages with partial metadata. A short list of secondary numbers. One account summary that showed recurring payments to a domestic intermediary. A vehicle tracker map. 2 storage unit leases under different names. And there, on the final page, a familiar name from my office. Kevin Darlow. He was one of our project coordinators. Mid-30s. Efficient. Forgettable in the way some competent people are. Good with schedules. Always early. The kind of person everyone trusts because he does small things reliably. I thought back through the previous few months and saw him differently all at once. The extra questions about my calendar. His unusual interest in which meetings I attended in person. The time he offered to take a courier envelope for me, and I let him. Facts. Paperwork. Process. That was where the power shifted. Not because I suddenly felt strong. I didn't. But because this was no longer just an injury. It was a system. And systems can be read. I asked for a laptop that had never touched my home network, office accounts, or personal cloud storage. Reese didn't like that. My father ignored him. 10 minutes later, I had one. I also asked for copies of 3 things. The suspicious after-hours office access logs, the payment records tied to the shell entities, and the internal calendar exports showing who had visibility into my location over the past year. Reese said, "What exactly do you think you're doing?" I answered honestly, "Removing noise." He crossed his arms. "You're a victim in this." "No," I said. "My son is." That ended the discussion. Evan came downstairs then and said Owen had fallen asleep on top of the blanket without even taking off his shoes. For a second, all the paperwork on the table blurred at the edges. I pictured him curled on an unfamiliar bed in an unfamiliar house because the woman who packed his lunches had crossed our yard with a gun. I stood up, went upstairs, and eased his shoes off without waking him. The room smelled faintly of clean detergent and old wood. One bedside lamp was on. His backpack had slipped half open onto the floor, and one worksheet was sticking out. Math homework. I folded the edge back in and zipped it shut. Then I stood there for a few seconds longer than I needed to. When I came back down, my father and Reese were arguing softly near the sink. I didn't join them. I sat at the table again, opened the laptop, and started with the calendar records. Step 1. Identify who needed access. Step 2. Identify who had more than that. Step 3. Compare names against money, movement, and timing. I did not need certainty yet. I needed shape. Within 40 minutes, Kevin Darlow's name appeared too often to be ordinary. He had viewed project folders beyond his scope. He had logged into scheduling dashboards at odd hours from a secondary device. And twice, on days Claire had insisted we stay home for dinner because we all needed a quiet night, my location data had been pulled within an hour by an internal account linked to his credentials. I wrote his name on the legal pad and underlined it once. Not hard, just enough. Then my secure phone lit up with an incoming message from an unknown number routed through one of the temporary channels my father's team had activated. It contained only an address in Fairfax County, a unit number, and 2 words, "She's moving." I read the message twice, then slid the phone across the table to my father. He looked at the address and said nothing for a few seconds. Reese stepped closer. "Where did that come from? Does it matter?" I asked. "Yes. It matters later," my father said. "Right now we verify." He handed the phone back to me and picked up another one from the counter. He made 2 calls in under a minute, both short, both in the same controlled tone. No names, no extra language. When he was done, he put the phone down and looked at me across the table. "There's movement at that address," he said. "A vehicle was seen 15 minutes ago. Lights on and off since midnight. Could be a transit site. Could be her. Could be." Reese was already shaking his head. "If she's there, we lock it down and bring in the field office." I asked how long. He gave me the kind of look people use when they think process should be respected simply because it exists. Long enough to do it correctly. That's not a number. It depends. I nodded once and turned back to the laptop. Emotion was still there, somewhere underneath. But it had moved farther away. I could feel it like pressure behind a wall. Useful later, maybe. Not now. I made another column on the legal pad. Immediate risks Owen exposed through school records. Home devices still active. Office contacts not fully isolated. Transit site possibly live. Then I added a second column. Immediate controls move Owen again if needed. Freeze visible routines. Pull financial and device logs. Confirm transit site before dawn. Silence, at that point, was a decision. Not passivity, just conservation. My father saw the list and said, "Good." I ignored the word this time and kept writing. Step 1. Close every simple route back to Owen. Step 2. Identify which people in my orbit were watching routine, not just information. Step 3. Force the network to move before it was ready. I looked up. If she's at that address and she thinks I'm still in motion, she has to make a choice. Stay hidden or reach for control. Reese said, "You are not bait." No, I said. I'm the last variable she hasn't solved. That landed harder than I intended. The room went quiet. My father leaned back slightly in his chair. Say what you're thinking. She lived inside my routines for 11 years, I said. She knows how I respond under stress. She knows who I call, where I drive when I'm tired, what I do when I think I can fix something myself. If she believes I'm frightened, she'll expect me to hide badly. If she believes I'm angry, she'll expect me to make contact. Either way, she'll position around me. And if we control what she sees, we control where she allocates attention. Reese frowned. You don't know that. I know enough. That was the truth. Not certainty. Pattern. The rest of the house stayed still around us. The clock above the stove clicked softly every second. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard gave a small settling sound. A draft moved under the back door and cooled my ankle where my pant leg had pulled up. Little ordinary details. They kept everything from drifting into abstraction. My father asked, "What would you move first?" My visible accounts, I said. Not all of them. Just enough activity to look frightened and disorganized. A gas purchase. One logged attempt to access the home alarm remotely. Maybe a card swipe tied to a location she would expect me to use if I thought I was being careful. Reese cut in. Absolutely not. I didn't look at him. It doesn't need to be real movement. It needs to look like it. He said, "You're talking about contaminating an active investigation." I finally turned to him. No, I'm talking about giving her a believable story to follow while you decide which form to file first. My father stood up and walked to the sink, then back again. A habit he had when he was working through 3 or 4 bad options and trying to decide which one was least expensive in human terms. What else? He asked. I tapped Kevin Darlow's name on the legal pad. If he was feeding calendars and project access, he may not know tonight failed. If he reaches back into the network before anyone warns him, we learned something from timing alone. Reese said, "So now you want surveillance on your own employee?" Yes. We were already heading there. I'm sure you were. That earned me a look from my father, but he let it pass. I kept going. Also the friend from Claire's lunches, I said. The woman in the photos. She's not social filler. She's structural support. Logistics, introductions, normalization, neighborhood legitimacy. People like that are rarely glamorous and almost always essential. My father nodded once. That aligns with what we're seeing. Then watch her harder than the obvious targets. He looked at Reese. Do it. The agent let out one controlled breath through his nose, then stepped into the hallway with his phone. That left my father and me alone for a moment in a kitchen that did not belong to either of us. He said, "You sound like yourself again." That's not a compliment. No, he said. It isn't. I closed the laptop halfway and asked the question that had been waiting under everything else. Did any of it feel real to her? He didn't pretend not to understand. I don't know. My son is asleep upstairs because his mother came down our hallway with a gun. I know. Do you? The words came out flatter than anger. That was worse in some ways. Anger burns off. Flatness stays. My father looked older then than he had when he first came in. I know I missed something that reached my family. That answer your question? Not fully, but enough for the hour we were in. I opened the laptop again. For the next 2 hours, everything moved in layers. Reese coordinated quiet surveillance around the Fairfax address. Another team began reviewing Darlow's office access and financial trails in real time. A request went out to preserve nearby traffic cameras before morning cleanup cycles could overwrite the footage. One of my father's analysts forwarded me a condensed set of metadata around the woman from Claire's social circle. The name I knew was false. The domestic background was stitched together the same way Claire's had been, though not as deeply. Useful, social, mobile. Exactly the kind of person who makes a dangerous arrangement feel harmless. Meanwhile, my father let me build the deception, not the content itself. He would never say that. But he did not stop it. Using a sterile machine and a controlled relay, I arranged 3 things. A failed login attempt to my home system from a coffee shop several miles away. A small fuel purchase tied to one of my backup cards at a station near an interstate entrance. And a message draft, unsent but visible in metadata, addressed to a college friend in Richmond with the words, "Need a place for Owen and me for a few days. Call when you wake up." Not dramatic. Not clever. Believable. The point was not to impress anyone. The point was to create the appearance of a man trying to stay calm while thinking badly. At 5:12 a.m., one of the Fairfax watchers reported movement. A woman exited the unit wearing a dark coat and carrying a duffel. She entered a gray sedan, sat in it for 4 minutes without moving, then drove west instead of toward the Beltway. Reese said, "Could be anyone." My father said, "Could be." I said nothing. I was watching the timing. Not fast enough for panic. Not slow enough for routine. She had paused in the car because she was waiting for a confirmation or checking whether her route was still clean. "Show me the route," I said. Reese hesitated. My father said, "Show him." A map came up on the laptop. The sedan took local roads first, then another, avoiding major cameras where possible, but not so aggressively that it looked defensive. Professional enough to suggest training. Careful enough to suggest fear. "Where does that lead?" I asked. "Depends where she turns next," Reese said. "No," I said quietly. "It depends what she thinks I'm going to do." I traced the road with one finger. If she believes I'm heading south or west with Owen, she doesn't need to follow me. She needs to intercept whoever I trust. She'll look for family first, old colleagues second, storage or fallback locations third. My father looked at me for a moment, then asked, "And if she can't reach any of those?" "Then she goes to the place where the story started to fail." Meaning, I tapped Kevin Darlow's name. At 5:26, Reese got the call. Darlow had just entered our office building using his own credentials, 40 minutes earlier than his normal pattern. He was alone. He went straight to the records room on the 3rd floor. My father looked at me. I said, "There." Reese was already moving, speaking into his phone. "Local field team can get there in. No sirens," I said. He turned, annoyed. "You don't set terms. If he's a support asset, he's there to clean or retrieve. The second he sees noise, he dumps devices, says he came in early for work, and buys himself time." Reese stared at me for a beat too long. Then my father said, "Plain clothes only. Quiet entry." That was the moment the room changed. Not because I was in charge. I wasn't. Because facts had started landing in the order I said they would. That makes people listen, even when they don't want to. Dawn came slowly through the blinds over the sink. Thin gray light at first, then enough to show the dust on the table and the coffee ring I'd left near the legal pad. I hadn't slept. Neither had my father. Reese looked as if sleep had become theoretical. Upstairs, Owen was still asleep. I held on to that. At 6:03, the team at my office reported in. Darlow had not gone to his desk. He had entered the records room with a key he should not have had access to. And inside his messenger bag were 2 external drives, a sealed envelope addressed by hand to a woman whose name I did not recognize, and a printed map with one location circled. My house. No, not the house. The detached guest suite at the back of the property. I sat very still for a second. Then I looked at my father and said, "He thinks she missed something there." Before he could answer, my secure phone vibrated again. Unknown number. This time the message was only one sentence. "There's a deposit box key taped under the lower shelf in your garage workbench. She used it twice this year." I looked at the message, then at my father. He read it over my shoulder and said, "Do not go back there." I wasn't planning to. That was true for about 3 seconds. Then I pictured the garage workbench in my mind. Bottom shelf. Left side stacked with paint trays and old tile samples. A row of labeled bins from old house projects. I could see it clearly because I had built the bench myself on a quiet Saturday years earlier, while Owen sat on the driveway drawing roads and sidewalk chalk. If there was a key there, it had been placed with confidence. Not hidden from me in a complicated way. Hidden inside my assumptions. That was worse. Reese came back into the kitchen with his phone still in his hand. Darlow's in custody. He said it like a victory, but his face didn't match it. What did he say? I asked. Nothing useful yet. That meant he had said enough to be careful with. I slid the phone into my pocket and stood. I need to confirm the box. My father's expression didn't change. No, if the key is there, we have a live financial or document route. If it's gone, we know she's already compensating. We can send a team. You can't, I said. And they'll turn the place inside out in a way she'd expect. If there's anything still active, it goes cold. Reese said, this is exactly why civilians don't insert themselves into live counterintelligence operations. I turned toward him. The person you're calling a civilian spent 11 years providing cover to your suspects without knowing it. I know what in that garage looks disturbed and what doesn't. Your team doesn't. He started to answer, but my father lifted a hand, and that ended it. The three of us stood in a triangle of weak morning light and bad options. Finally, my father said, you do not enter the house. I won't. You do not improvise. I won't. That was less true. You go in, you confirm the key, and you come out. Nothing else. I nodded once. Reese looked openly unhappy. This is a mistake. My father said, probably. Then he reached into his coat and handed me a small earpiece and a plain zippered pouch. Inside it were nitrile gloves, a compact flashlight, and a sterile evidence sleeve. I took the pouch. No one said anything for a few seconds after that. Then I went upstairs to check on Owen. He was awake now, sitting cross-legged on the bed with the blanket around his shoulders, watching some low-volume cartoon with the kind of fixed attention children use when they are trying not to think about something else. Morning light had softened the room. The lamp was off. One sock had twisted halfway around his foot. He looked up when I entered. Are we leaving again? Not right now. He studied my face for a second. You're going somewhere. Children know more than adults like to believe. I have to check one thing, I said. Then I'll be back. Can Evan stay? Yes. He nodded. That seemed to settle it for him, or at least settle it enough. I sat beside him and straightened the sock without thinking much about it. Eat something when they bring breakfast up, okay? Okay. He hesitated, then asked quietly, is Mom still looking for us? There are questions with no good answer, only controlled ones. I'm making sure she can't reach you. He accepted that. Or maybe he accepted me saying it in a calm voice. Sometimes that is enough for a child in the short term. When I stood, he caught my wrist lightly. Come back. I put my hand over his and said, I will. Then I left before the room could ask more of me than I had available. The drive back to Alexandria happened in silence. A surveillance car went ahead of us, and another stayed back. Reese was in the front passenger seat, speaking occasionally into a low mic. My father stayed at the townhouse with Owen. I understood why. That did not make me like it. The neighborhood looked ordinary in the daylight. That was the strange part. Trash bins at the curb. A dog walker with 2 golden retrievers. A man jogging in a bright windbreaker with headphones on. The harmless architecture of a weekday morning. If you didn't know better, our house was just another quiet place with trimmed hedges and expensive windows. My house. That phrase still rose automatically, though ownership now felt administrative more than personal. We stopped half a block away. Reese turned in his seat. You have 6 minutes. That's generous. It's practical. I got out, crossed the side yard through a narrow gap between hedges, and entered the backyard the way I had once used when carrying lumber in from the driveway. The grass was damp. My shoes darkened at the edges. Somewhere nearby a sprinkler clicked through its rotation. The air held that cool early smell of wet soil and cedar mulch. The detached guest suite sat quiet near the fence. Its blinds were drawn. Beyond it, the garage side door was exactly where it had always been, beneath the small overhang with the loose gutter I had meant to fix for 6 months. I put on the gloves before touching anything. The side door opened with my key. Inside, the garage smelled like cut wood, machine oil, and dust warmed by trapped air. Light came through the high window in a flat stripe across the workbench. Everything looked unchanged. The drill charging on the shelf. 2 paint cans near the wall. Owen's old scooter folded beside a storage cabinet. I moved slowly, not because I was afraid of what I'd find, because a room tells you more when you don't disturb its grammar. There were signs, small ones. A bin not pushed fully back. A screwdriver set angled differently than I kept it. Someone had opened the lower cabinet recently and closed it with less care than I would have. Not sloppy, just not intimate with the space. I crouched at the workbench. Lower shelf. Left side. I reached under the lip of the wood and felt a strip of tape. Then metal. A key. Small. Brass. Number stamped. I slid it free, placed it in the evidence sleeve, and looked once more along the underside of the shelf. Beside where the tape had been fixed was a second patch of adhesive residue, older and lighter. Something else had been stored there before. I touched nothing else. On my way out, I stopped just inside the garage and looked toward the kitchen door through the interior window panel. The house beyond was quiet. Sunlight lay across the floor tiles in a shape I knew well from 100 normal mornings. I could almost hear dishes, or imagine I could. Coffee. Owen asking a question. Claire standing at the sink. Memory is efficient that way. It offers you the whole scene in one flash, even when the truth has already replaced it. I closed the garage door behind me and walked back out to the yard. Confirmed, I said into the mic clipped beneath my collar. Reese answered in my ear. Come out now. I was already moving toward the hedge when another voice came in over the channel. Not Reese. One of the perimeter watchers. Movement at the front. I stopped. Describe it, Reese said. Female. Dark sedan. Parked 2 houses down. Driver remains inside. My pulse changed, but my pace didn't. Is it her? Reese asked. Can't confirm from angle. I reached the side path and paused under the shadow of the eaves. The front of the house was out of my line of sight. I could hear a car door in the distance. Then nothing. Silence again. Active silence. Chosen. Reese said, stay where you are. I stayed. 10 seconds. Maybe 15. Then a voice came from the far side of the house. Calm. Familiar. Controlled. Daniel, if your people are in the shrubs, they're visible. Every muscle in my back locked for an instant, then settled. Claire. Not Claire. Her voice, exactly as I had heard it across dinner tables and school functions and late nights when she read beside me in bed. Only stripped now of the domestic softness that had framed it for years. Reese swore under his breath in my ear. Hold position. Her voice came again. He'll listen to me longer than he'll listen to you. I stepped forward before Reese could stop me and came around the corner into the front drive. She was standing beside a dark sedan with the driver's door open. No visible weapon in her hands. Long dark coat. Hair pulled back. Sunglasses even in the morning light, though she removed them when she saw me. For a second, she looked exactly like the woman who used to remind me to buy printer paper or ask whether Owen's permission slip had gone back to school. Then that image passed, and what remained was composure. She looked at me steadily and said, you should have left the city. I stopped 6 or 7 yards away. Far enough. Close enough. I thought about it. That would have been smarter. No, I said. It would have been easier. Behind the hedges and parked cars, I knew other people were positioned. She knew it too. That was what made the scene controlled. Not trust. Geometry. She gave the smallest nod, as if acknowledging that point. Do you have Owen? I did not answer. She washed my face, then looked past me briefly toward the house. I told them not to involve him. The sentence landed in me and found nothing soft to attach to. You walk toward his room, I said. Her expression changed only slightly. Plans changed. No, I said. That's not what happened. The street stayed quiet around us. Somewhere farther off, a delivery truck backed up with a soft electronic beep. A bird moved through the hedge near the mailbox. Ordinary sounds. They made the conversation feel even colder. She rested one hand on the open car door. You don't understand the position I was in. I understand it very well now. That seemed to register. Not emotionally. Structurally. She was recalculating. Her eyes dropped once to my hand, and I realized I was still holding the evidence sleeve with the key inside. There it is, she said. So that was it. No speech. No apology. No attempt to revive the marriage in that moment. Just recognition of the object she had come back for. A deposit box, I said. Used twice this year. Give it to me. I almost smiled at the simplicity of the request. No. She glanced toward the neighboring house, then back to me. You think whatever's in there will explain things. I think it will confirm them. Her jaw tightened slightly. First real crack in the surface. It contains instructions, she said. Names. Locations. People who are not part of this and do not deserve to be dragged into it. I said, you had 11 years to discover I don't respond well to vague warnings. For the first time, she looked tired. Not guilty, not warm, just tired in a real, human way, as if the effort of being several people at once had finally started costing her something visible. "I did care about him," she said quietly. "I let the sentence sit in the air and die there." Then I answered the only part worth answering. "You don't get to define what care means." Her face closed again after that. Professional once more. "Then listen carefully," she said. "If that box is opened the wrong way, people move. Evidence disappears. Some of the people around this are domestic, not foreign. They have attorneys, companies, boards, foundations. They look clean. Once they hear noise, they're gone." That, at least, sounded true. Truth often arrives wrapped in self-interest. I knew that. "So give me a reason," I said. "To believe this is about stopping them and not protecting yourself." She looked at me for a long second. When she spoke again, her voice had gone lower. "Because I came here alone." That was the first useful thing she'd said. No debate, just fact. She had come herself because either she no longer trusted the people around her, or the contents of that box threatened her position as much as ours. Reese said sharply in my ear, "End this." I ignored him. I said to her, "Step away from the vehicle. Put your hands where they can be seen." She gave one short breath that might have been a laugh if there had been any warmth in it. "There he is. I was always here." "I know," she said. Then, slowly, she placed both hands on the roof of the car. No one moved for a second. Then agents came in from both sides of the street at once. Plain clothes, concealed vests, drawn weapons kept low but ready. Fast, disciplined, no shouting beyond what procedure required. She did not run. She turned her head just enough to look at me as they closed the distance and said, "The bank is in Georgetown. Branch closed 4 years ago. Basement vaults remained active under a private trust arrangement. Box 214. One of the agents secured her wrists behind her back. She kept her eyes on me. "Don't let your father bury this in side channels," she said. "There's an American in it. Older. Real estate. Charities. Clean haircut. He's the one you should worry about." Then Reese was beside me, taking the evidence sleeve from my hand and pulling me back 2 steps whether I wanted it or not. She was guided toward the car without resistance. No scene. No collapse. No last-minute confession. Just procedure. Controlled. Respectable. Final in appearance, though not in substance. As the sedan door shut on her, I realized my heart was beating much harder than anything in my face had shown. Reese looked at me. "You should have stayed behind the hedge." "Probably." He didn't answer that. A second later, my secure phone vibrated in my pocket. A third-party confirmation had come in from the bank's legal emergency line. "Deposit box 214 exists. Access history confirms 2 visits in the last 6 months by a person using Claire's documented identity. A court order can be expedited." By early afternoon, the court order was signed. That part, at least, moved quickly once the right names were on the request and the right office understood what was at risk. A federal magistrate authorized access. The bank's legal department stopped pretending this was an ordinary privacy matter. And an evidence team met us in a secured room below street level in Georgetown, where the old vaults had been left in place after the public branch closed. The room was colder than it needed to be. Not dramatically cold, just overconditioned in the way financial buildings often are, as if cooler air might suggest discipline. The fluorescent lights were steady, no flicker. The walls were painted a bland cream over older concrete. A camera in the upper corner watched the table where the contents would be logged. I sat at one end of the room with Agent Reese, 2 evidence officers, and an assistant U.S. attorney whose name I only heard once and then forgot. My father stood against the far wall with his hands folded in front of him. He had the look he always had when something was becoming real on paper. The bank manager arrived with a ring of keys and a face that said he wished to be anywhere else. Box 214 was smaller than I expected. That should not have mattered, but it did. 11 years of deception had made me imagine something heavier. A thick folder, a stack of passports, bundles of cash. Instead, the tray that came out of the vault slot held just a compact packet of materials arranged with almost irritating neatness. Order again. That was the first thing I noticed. Inside the box were 6 items. A slim envelope of printed account summaries, a flash drive, a folded property ledger, 2 photographs, and a small spiral notebook with dates written in a careful hand on the front. No one touched anything immediately. The evidence team documented the box as found. Photos from multiple angles. Timestamp. Chain of custody language. Gloves changed. Packaging opened under camera view. Every step narrated aloud in a calm, procedural tone. That tone helped. It turned personal ruin into evidence, and evidence can be handled. The account summaries were first. On their own, they looked almost dull. Transfers between holding companies, consulting fees, property management payments, charitable disbursements. But the assistant U.S. attorney leaned forward before the second page was turned and said, "There." A company name, then another, then a trust, all linked, through routing records and shell layers, to a domestic real estate group I recognized from local development news and industry events. Nothing large enough to make a national headline by itself. Large enough to move money, property, and influence quietly for years. I asked for the property ledger next. One of the evidence officers unfolded it carefully across the table. It was a list of addresses, residential units, small office spaces, short-term rentals, a storage facility, a townhouse in Fairfax, an apartment in Northwest D.C. The detached guest suite on my own property was listed too, not by address, but by an internal code. Next to each location was a column of dates and a notation I recognized almost immediately for what it was: occupancy cycles, not rentals, use, safe locations, meeting points, storage spaces. A support map disguised as property management. Reese exhaled once through his nose. That's enough for search warrants. My father said, if the rest matches. The flash drive went to digital forensics on site. That took time, which meant we moved to the notebook. It was not a diary, nothing that generous. It was a working ledger written by someone who believed systems mattered more than stories. Dates, initials, payment confirmations, short references to school events, office gatherings, charity dinners, design meetings, and neighborhood functions. A life broken into access opportunities and maintenance obligations. I recognized my own anniversary dinner in one of the entries. Not by emotion, by the restaurant receipt notation. I recognized Owen's third-grade winter concert. Not because of the memory itself, though I had one. Because beside the date was a two-word note, extended contact. I sat very still after that. No one in the room looked at me directly, which I appreciated. Professional people know when witnessing becomes intrusive. The two photographs came last. One was of Claire with the man from the earlier surveillance images, the one linked to diplomatic cover. They were seated at an outdoor cafe, talking over coffee. No intimacy, just business conducted with discipline. The other was the one that settled the final question. A candid shot taken at what looked like a fundraising event. A man in his 60s. American. Silver hair. Excellent suit. The kind of face that appears on donor boards and at ribbon cuttings. Beside him, half turned away, was Claire. On the back of the photo, in the same careful hand as the notebook, was a single line. WS approved domestic bridge continuity. I read it once and handed it to Reese. He looked at the initials, then at the property records, then at my father. Schaefer, he said. That was the businessman Claire had named in the driveway without naming him directly. Real estate, charities, clean haircut, older, third-party confirmation. No theory now, no instinct, no pattern recognition required. Just documents, numbers, timelines, and a photograph. The flash drive results came in 12 minutes later. There were contact trees, escrow records, scanned IDs, maintenance reimbursements for locations used by the network, and encrypted notes that the forensic team began unpacking on the spot. More importantly, there were two folders that linked domestic money to foreign tasking through a chain of service contracts and false renovation invoices. That part made my stomach turn for a different reason. Architectural consulting had been used as camouflage, blueprint revisions, site inspections, accessibility upgrades, harmless language carrying money where cash would have been louder. One of the invoices referenced a project my firm had lost to another bidder 2 years earlier. Another referenced a building tour I had attended without thinking twice about who else was in the room. Again, not because I was involved, because I had been near useful systems. The assistant U.S. attorney stepped into the hall to start the first wave of warrant calls. Reese's phone lit up almost immediately with parallel movement orders, search teams, financial seizures, emergency preservation notices. The machinery of consequence finally catching up. My father remained where he was by the wall. I asked, "Did you know about Schaefer before today?" He answered carefully, "We had fragments. Not enough that would survive sunlight. That was his way of saying suspicion without proof. And now it survives. There is a strange kind of calm that comes when truth no longer depends on anyone's credibility, only on what the records show. I felt that then. Not peace, not satisfaction, just the end of uncertainty in one direction. I said, then don't let him bargain his way into a cleaner version of this. My father nodded once. He won't. He meant it. I believed him. By evening, Schaefer had not made it out of the country. His accounts were frozen before his travel arrangements were complete. 2 of his properties were searched. One storage site connected to the ledger yielded additional cash, burner phones, and documents that reinforced the financial chain. Under pressure from the records and the speed of the warrants, one of his attorneys advised immediate surrender rather than a public arrest at his office. He turned himself in through counsel before midnight. Quietly. That felt appropriate. No dramatic takedown. No cameras. Just a man in an expensive coat walking into a federal building because paperwork had made denial too expensive. Darlow, meanwhile, began talking once he understood that the evidence from the office, the ledger, and the property map had made him replaceable. He confirmed calendar pulls, schedule reporting, and physical transfers of project materials. Not ideology exactly. Money first. Fear second. Self-preservation always. Ordinary motives doing ugly work. The woman from Claire's social circle also folded once confronted with the property records and payment routes. She had coordinated introductions, covered absences, maintained social continuity, and arranged use of domestic spaces that looked too normal to question. One by one, the structure gave way the way old failing buildings do when the right load-bearing lie is removed. Not all at once. Then all at once. Claire was processed under her false and probable true identities while the lawyers and intelligence teams argued over venue, classification, and which parts of her history would be spoken aloud in court. I was not present for any of that. By then I had nothing useful to add to her file. The next morning, I was asked to review one final item. A recording. It had been pulled from a secure interview room after she agreed to limited questioning with counsel present. I was not asked to watch the whole thing. Only one segment relevant to the chain of evidence. In it, she confirmed that Owen had never been the original purpose of her placement. That did not help. She also confirmed that when orders shifted to termination, she delayed. That helped even less. Facts are not absolution. They are only shape. I turned the screen off before the clip ended. Reese, who had become less argumentative now that the case no longer depended on his having all the ideas first, said, "You don't need to review more." I know, and I did. The legal process after that was almost anticlimactic in its discipline. Charges stacked. Supporting records verified. Timelines harmonized. Witnesses isolated. Protective orders drafted. Every ugly thing translated into plain federal language. Conspiracy. Fraud. Espionage-related offenses. Attempted murder. Financial facilitation. False identity documents. Nothing in those terms captured what it meant to a child to ask whether his mother had ever been real. But law is not built to hold that part. It holds what can be proven. That evening, after 2 days without proper sleep, I went back to the townhouse in Arlington. Evan opened the door before I knocked. He looked at my face once and stepped aside without speaking. Owen was at the kitchen table doing math, pencil in hand, cereal bowl half finished. He had one foot tucked under the chair the way he always did when he was concentrating. The overhead light was warm. Someone had made grilled cheese earlier. I could still smell the butter in the room. He looked up when I came in. "Did you find what you needed?" I set my keys down carefully in the bowl by the door and took off my coat. "Yes." "Is it over?" I thought about the warrants, the charges, the interviews, the evidence bags, the court calendars already beginning to fill. Then I thought about what mattered to him. "The part that could reach you," I said, "is over." He held my eyes for a second, then nodded and returned to his worksheet. That was all. No speech. No dramatic embrace. Just a child accepting a boundary because the adult he trusted had finally given him one that sounded solid. I stood there for a moment with one hand on the back of a chair and let the quiet kitchen settle around me. Then I washed my hands at the sink for longer than necessary and started looking for a clean pan to make tea. We stayed in the Arlington townhouse for another week.